Everybody, I'm Devin Dwyer. Welcome to the Briefing Room New York edition. Final countdown to Election Day. Great to have you with us today. I'm joined by the political brain trust of ABC News, political director Rick Klein, deputy political director Marilyn S. Parks, and the great Matt Dowd is here, ABC News contributor. Great to have you guys all with us. Here we are, the final hours. Everybody is anxiously awaiting the big results tomorrow. The record turnout already in the early vote. And one of the places that we're most closely watching is Georgia. That's where Steve Osunsami has been on the trail in this final stretch. The governor's race there, one of the hottest of the season, Steve, and there has been a dramatic twist again in this race over voting rights, allegations of voter suppression, and now allegations of hacking. Bring us up to speed on the latest in that twist in that race.
So the current Secretary of State, Brian Kemp, who's also running for governor, on Saturday announced that he believes that the Democratic Party hacked into state voter rolls but were unsuccessful. He gave very little evidence about how that happened, but it was a giant accusation which the Democrats deny 100% and accuse Kemp of actually trying to pull off a political stunt to gin the Republican Party just hours now before the election. Kemp went further than just the accusation, saying that he's now contacted the FBI to investigate this. We've reached out to federal authorities. They are not confirming that they're looking into this at this point and have no comment, but it's a huge accusation that's coming just hours now before the election, and it's got everyone talking about whether or not this is true. As I understand it, how this happened was a voter who identified a vulnerability with the state website, notified Democrat Party officials who then shared this with the Secretary of State's office, and somehow this became the Democratic Party trying to hack into state voter rolls. At the rally that Kemp appeared at with the president yesterday south of Atlanta in Macon, Georgia, neither of the two made any mention of this. And I will say, Devin, there's one point that we have to underline in all of this, a criticism against the Secretary of State. He is facing mounting pressure to resign or at least step aside from this election because during his day job, his official duty is to monitor elections, which people here on both sides actually say is a huge conflict of interest.
And Steve, Stacey Abrams, the Democrat, was on Good Morning America this morning. She said this whole thing is cooked up at the last minute. Certainly, it smells of politics on both sides in these back and forth allegations. What's your read there? You've been a longtime Georgia resident of how this is playing with voters. Many of them already made up their minds. So do you think this will have any impact?
I think it will. I think it's working. I think that what we're seeing in this election here, which we haven't seen as much in previous elections for governor, is you have both sides speaking to their base, preaching to the choir. And what Brian Kemp has done in this, whether or not these accusations are true or not, which they do appear to be somewhat manipulated, putting it kindly, is that many of his supporters will be more motivated to vote because of this. There is also a flip side to this coin, something that was spread around over the weekend. There were these racist robocalls that were sent into voters' homes over the weekend, making fun of Oprah Winfrey, who was here last week campaigning for Abrams, one of them referring to her as Aunt Jemima. Those robocalls are indeed fact, those did happen, and they have the same net effect in terms of their influence on voters here. Each side is trying to get their voters to the polls. This is about turnout. And one of the campaigns over the weekend had a conference call where they shared that they believe about 65% of Democrats have voted so far in early voting and about 55% of Republicans. This is all about turnout. The polls right now put this as a very close race within the margin of error. Whoever gets the most voters to the polls of their people, gets more of their people to the polls on Tuesday, wins.
All right, Steve Osunsami, we know you'll be staying on the case tomorrow night and are part of our live team coverage. Thank you so much, Steve, for that report. Matt, I was in Georgia yesterday with the president and struck how much this race is racially tinged. It's in all the conversation you have with voters on both sides. I happened to be at the Trump rally for most of the day, also talked to some Democrats, and all of them brought up the issue of race in this debate.
Well, this is a state that's obviously from the old Confederacy that has changed.
Long history.
But it's changed dramatically in the course of the last 20 years. And it's now a state that if it's not purple yet, it's getting to purple, which is why this race has become incredibly competitive. And the difference between Atlanta and the suburbs and the rest of the state is dramatic. I mean, it's speaking directly to this. I mean, this would, to me, is the definition of a conflict of interest. The guy, Kemp, runs the state elections. He makes this allegation from a place where he actually runs for about a race for the chief executive of the state that he's running for.
Right.
Seems completely a conflict of interest.
And it's not just the voting system he oversees, Mary Alice, but you've been covering these voter registrations, 50,000 of them that have been put on hold.
And I think it's worth pointing out that, as Matt's saying, he's the referee as well as one team. And he's the one that should have any evidence of an issue. And yet he's not producing any evidence. He's just making an accusation. And that, I think, is not going to go over very well. But what Steve was saying there at the end, it seems a little bit tried and true, that it's all going to come out to turnout. But that's really true in Georgia because she hasn't run to the middle. Stacey Abrams is not trying to win over moderates or Republicans. She is trying to build out the party in Georgia and bring new Democrats to the table.
Yeah.
And I think what you see in this race and a handful of others is just a clear distillation of the choices. The president has gone out and run a very misleading campaign to try to frame choices in false ways. I actually think in Georgia, Florida, and Texas, you're seeing a clean contrast presented by the candidates themselves that offer that up. And that is raised the stakes of what we already know is going to be a record-smashing election.
And keep in mind that I mean, obviously this is a very close race that we're all going to be watching tomorrow night because it would be historic if Stacey Abrams was
first African-American governor
to win that race. But it's going to be incredibly close, and we may go into a runoff if neither side gets 50%. But there's also some key congressional race that even if she loses, by virtue of her turnout, may have changed that race as well.
It's a lot to watch in Georgia. You know, spending the day there, as I was saying, a lot of racially tinged conversation, but also a lot of focus on immigration among Republicans. I was struck by the number of Republicans that said their top issue this election, granted this is at a Trump rally, is the caravan in rural Georgia, of all places, thousands of miles from the border. They were talking about the caravan, and that is where Marcus Moore is right now with these traveling migrants of poor and impoverished, many Hondurans, Mexicans traveling up to the U.S. border. The president has made a part of this campaign. Marcus, tell us where you are now and what's happening there today.
Well, Devin, good afternoon to you. This caravan has made it to Mexico City, the capital of this country, and just behind me you can see the people who are lined up to get food here at this sports complex that has been turned into a shelter, a refuge for the thousands of migrants who've been in the midst of this caravan. This is an area where just last week they held the big Formula One race, which is a huge international event where thousands of people show up. There's also concerts that are held here and big sporting events, and I bring that up because it is a place that can handle a lot of people. And when we talk about this caravan, we are talking literally about thousands of people who this afternoon have found refuge here at this big sports complex in Mexico City. And I want to show you off in the distance there where people are getting clothing. This is where a lot of people have been recuperating and getting refreshments. And I do want to talk to one of the migrants who we've met along the way, David Mendoza, and he's from El Salvador. And David, you made it here to Mexico City yesterday. Tell me how important you thought it was to make it here to Mexico City and why.
Well, I think this is really important for all the people here because this is where they're gonna they're gonna discuss where they're gonna go to, either what border, either to, towards Texas or California.
Absolutely, and so as we've described this as a fork in the road, this is where people like David and families will decide, whether or not they will stay here in Mexico, perhaps, or continue north. And I do want to ask you, David, I've heard that some people have heard some of the things that President Trump has said, and they also know about the soldiers at the border, yes. And because of that, they don't want to go to the U.S. Anymore because they don't feel like it will be safe. Yes. Is that how you feel, or do you still want to go to the U.S.?
No. I was already thinking, when I got deported, I knew that I wasn't going to go back because I got punished for 10 years. So I'm going to have to wait those 10 years here in Mexico. It's not because of Trump and the Marines. It's not because of that. It's because I know I want to follow what they told me, you know, the rules, I'm gonna have to wait the 10 years here in Mexico.
So you want to do it the right way,
Yes,
the legal way.
the legal way, yeah.
And so there you go, Devin, hearing from David. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it. And David, one of the many migrants who we've met along the way, who says he wants to make it to the U.S., but he wants to do it the right way. And because of the rules, he has to wait several years to do that. David, thank you. It's good to see you. Devin, I want to show you around just a little bit because I can tell you that the mood here is very different. We've been to a number of towns where the migrant caravan has come to a stop for the day. And here in Mexico City, it is much more relaxed. It is very calm here and much more festive, if you will. Let me show you very quickly. I know we don't have a lot of time.
Yeah, Marcus, as you're doing that, let me ask
Yes,
you
sir.
if you can hear me. Give us a sense, a locator on you. How far away are they from the U.S.-Texas border? Is it, are we talking days, weeks, months?
We're talking, at the rate they've been going, we're talking weeks, Devin, absolutely weeks. Con permiso, señor. Lo siento, con permiso. Gracias. We're talking weeks. We're still about 1,000 miles away from the nearest port of entry into the United States, and that would be Texas, so in the Reynosa area, Tamaulipas. But take a look. I don't know if you can see around the people here. There's some of the entertainment that they are trying to give the migrants here who have been in the midst of a very long journey. And this is the first I've seen of entertainment for the adults. We've seen it, Devin, for the children, and it certainly gives you a sense of this being a major milestone for them on this journey. And in fact, you were asking about how far away they are from the U.S.-Mexico border. There are people here who are thinking they'll stay in Mexico City here at this shelter at least for the next few days as they figure out what their next steps will be. And there are a number of agencies here to help them figure that out.
All right, Marcus Moore for us in Mexico, traveling with the caravan of migrants. Thank you so much for that, Marcus. You've been doing a tremendous job down there. You know, I'm struck by how much this is in our consciousness headed into tomorrow and how quickly it seems almost everybody that watches politics closely thinks this will go away after tomorrow in the conversation. Do you buy that? This is something that the president simply is fixated on.
But for the fact that Election Day is tomorrow, I don't think there's any possible way troops would have been sent 2 months early or 7 weeks early to the border in order to make some demonstration of strength. And the reality of it, as it was shown, this is actually a humanitarian problem. Right. This isn't a invading a horde of people with guns that are coming to storm the border. It's a humanitarian problem that each country they've passed through has tried to deal with in this. I actually think the political calculation, and Rick and I were just talking, we're not going to know until tomorrow night as the results come in. But I think for every base voter that Trump thinks by doing this he's caused to have more passion and go vote, he's actually offended two independent voters by doing it, because I think most of the independent voters in the country who are going to decide this election look at this and say, these are poor people, they're struggling people, I don't see a criminal element, I don't see this, let's treat them humanely, let's figure out a way, let's secure our border and do that. We'll know tomorrow night, but from my sense of things and watching the polls and all of that, I see no movement to the president and movement to the Republicans in the course of this.
And speaking of tone and speaking of turning off independent voters, women voters, there is a new ad that President Trump has been running that's been getting some extraordinary blowback for its treatment of immigrants. Let's take a look. I think we just have a little snip of it.
We have a lot of ads, and they certainly are effective based on the numbers that we're seeing. Well, a lot of things are offensive. Your questions are offensive a lot of times, so, you know.
All right, that was the president responding to the ad, but Mary Alice, you could tell us a little bit about this ad. It was extraordinarily racist to most people. Featured
and a number of television networks have said that they're not going to air it because of that. But Democrats have been out there trying to use the president's messaging to their advantage by saying, we agree that immigration reform should happen. We've been pushing for immigration reform as well. They've been trying to offer a little bit of a reality check here. It was the Republicans who had control of both chambers of Congress and the White House over the last 2 years, tried to pass immigration reform, and Republicans could not agree. The president could not agree with other Republicans about what to do on the border.
They did seem to get themselves in a little bit of trouble, though. They walked out onto some thin ice and said they should abolish ICE. That also seemed to give them just a little bit of trouble.
I naming a few of them, but in a lot of these border states is exactly where we're seeing Democrats on offense. In Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, Democrats saying we would like to work on this issue sensibly. Republicans haven't been able to figure it out.
And I think you're seeing the two parties make a play to do two different Americas here at the close. They may both be right. I mean, you could see the situation where Democrats take the House, Republicans hold or even expand the majority in the Senate because of the same set of messaging, because of the same president at the top of the ticket, and because these issues hit. But as Matthew says, it's a big gamble because we don't know what this electorate's going to look like. We think that we have some indications about it being younger and more diverse and larger than a typical midterm electorate. But if we're talking about an election that truly changes that, then that play to the base will not end up being a smart one. It's something that sacrifices the House and may even jeopardize some other potential Republican pickups in the Senate.
And speaking of
real quick, I was going to say Brad Parscale, who was the one in charge of this ad, who's
President Trump's campaign manager,
his campaign manager now for 2020, who's never run a campaign before, tweeted out this afternoon saying he was offended by the fact that MSNBC, NBC, Facebook, and now Fox News won't run the ad. So I tweeted at him. I said, "Listen, I know might not be familiar with this, but ads have to contain both facts and they can't be racist. So in the future, you might want to do ads."
Did he respond?
He didn't respond.
Okay.
But I think that's the problem. Is it was factually incorrect. It was both factually incorrect because they told a story that fundamentally wasn't true about what the Democrats did or didn't do in this. And for most people that watched the ad, it felt very racist.
And one of the places that is tracking immigrant sentiment, tracking the president's ads, certainly is Texas. Everything's bigger in Texas, I think, and the turnout there certainly has been. Take a look at some of these graphics about the turnout in Texas. Matt's from Texas. He can attest to this. We have some of the numbers just in extraordinary levels of early voting that have surpassed all of 2014, the last midterm voting totals already.
In total
vote. Early vote has exceeded total vote. And the voting continues. Our Paula Ferris is there. She's been tracking voter turnout and, of course, that key Senate race, Ted Cruz, Beto O'Rourke, the Democrat. Paula, there she is.
Hey.
Paula,
hey there, guys.
great to see you.
Matt,
Give us
how
the
do you
latest.
feel?
I don't like
Matt,
the
we kind of switched spots.
I'm in New York, and you're standing in front of the Lone Star flag. This doesn't feel right.
I know. I actually feel like I'm standing on the sun. It's so hot right now. But you guys, this is a hot race. And Matt, you know this better than anybody. I mean, this should have been a slam dunk race for Ted Cruz. This particular seat has been red since 1988, or since Ted Cruz was 17. I'm not going to indict any of us as to how old we were back in 1988, but no denying that the demographics are changing here in the state of Texas. I spoke with Ted Cruz, and he's not taking anything for granted. He believes that the momentum is on his side right now, and he says he's confident that if his people show up to the polls, he will prevail. Take a listen.
I think the momentum is very much with us. We're seeing record turnout, which I think is great news.
Right.
Look, we always knew the hard left was going to show up. They were ticked off. This election was all about ordinary Texans showing up and voting our values. And we're seeing, you know, you look at that enthusiasm, that room is bursting at the gills. We're seeing that all over Texas. And so I'm very encouraged.
Do you think that early voter momentum is leaning your way?
I do. This was all about getting Texans to focus on this race and focus on the issues. You know, 2 months ago, every other day we had these media profiles that were just puff pieces. They were all puppy dogs and rainbows. And in the last 2 months, I think,
Beto O'Rourke.
Yes. And the national media was in love with him because he was running a hard left campaign. He was running a Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren campaign that had a lot of national reporters excited. But it's not where the people of Texas are.
Sure. So Devin, you brought up the numbers here, the early voting numbers, which the numbers are just mind-boggling. 5 million voted early, which surpassed the total amount in 2014. You would think that those numbers would lean towards Beto O'Rourke. He's running a really strong ground game. He's been present on campuses. He's targeting young voters, minority voters, been to all 254 counties. I was surprised when I was at that Ted Cruz rally last night. He talks about the enthusiasm, and I spoke to some of the overflow crowd. He says this is the type of thing we're seeing consistently at our rallies. People can't get in. So he said, don't dismiss our enthusiasm. And then I asked them how many of them voted early. Take a listen. All right. So, guys, I'm going to reenact what happened. Big group of people couldn't get in the rally. I'm talking probably 50 people. Oh, we have it now. Here you go. We're at a Ted Cruz rally. Who here, raise your hand if you voted early?
Yeah, I hear. Yep.
Pretty much all of you voted early.
Yes, we did.
Okay, why did you vote early?
Why? To avoid the line.
To avoid the line? Sir, why did you vote early?
Just to get my voice out there and
Okay.
be heard.
Anybody else want to answer? Why did you vote early,
I
sir?
voted early so I could tell everybody else that they should be voting the same way that I did.
Right. Are you surprised how many people have come to the polls early? Are you surprised at the record numbers?
No. There's a lot going on, and we want to make sure that our voices are heard.
The Trump effect.
And these two candidates, you guys, they couldn't be any more different in personality and policy. Ted Cruz is going out there on the stump and he's preaching job security and freedom. Conversely, Beto O'Rourke is preaching healthcare, dreamers, and no wall. These guys are literally night and day different. But Beto O'Rourke was in Houston this morning. He has just been running at breakneck speed. He was at a rally and he talked about the enthusiasm that we're seeing so far in terms of the early vote. Take a listen.
In a state that previously ranked 50th, dead last in the country in voter turnout, not because we like our democracy less than anyone else, not by accident, 100% on purpose, by design, this, the most gerrymandered state in the union, where the courts have found that some were drawn out of a congressional district solely based on their race or their ethnicity. We have transcended those barriers, those obstacles. We made sure that those who've been counted off can stand up and be counted.
So that was Houston. Now he's headed to Dallas. And then tonight he's going to be here on the campus of UTEP, which is where he's going to hold his final rally as he makes this final push. And then he's going to be watching the returns come in at a stadium here tomorrow night in El Paso as well. But I talked to both of these candidates. They're both exhausted. They're ready to cross the finish line. They both admit this is taking a toll on their family. They have young children. And as for Ted Cruz, he's going to be watching those returns tomorrow night in Houston, which is 11 hours away. Matt Dowd, I had no idea how large this state is, by the way. You didn't give me any sort of forewarning.
If you
it's
left
like a country in and of itself.
If you left El Paso in your car and drove to Beaumont, it would take you 18 hours.
Have you done that?
Insane.
Yes, I've done that.
Insane.
I've done that.
And that's what's remarkable about the race, and you can understand the pure exhaustion that these guys are feeling at this point. Particularly Beto O'Rourke, who has canvassed and crisscrossed. That's why he doesn't have a voice anymore. But Ted Cruz told me he's had like 50 town halls in just the last couple of weeks. So these guys are going for it. We'll see what happens tomorrow night.
All right, Paula Ferris in Texas. We know you're there to the finish. Paula, thank you so much for that. It is extraordinary to see this playing out in Texas.
And I'll admit my age to something she said, because she said 1988. I was 27 years old then, and I was running Lloyd Benson's campaign, who was a Democrat, who won that seat, then resigned to become Bill Clinton's Secretary of Treasury, and that last time that seat was held by...
What's behind this? What's behind this turnout? Is it a Beto effect? Is it the Trump effect? What do you think it is? Just the whole environment?
I think it's a combination of a Beto, less Trump. It's a Beto and Ted effect. And Ted was always vulnerable in this race because after his presidential campaign, his numbers were low in Texas. He was vulnerable in a red state, but a red state that's trending towards lighter red and ultimately will be purple because of the growth of the Latino population. So Ted was vulnerable because of how he's been perceived in the state, but also it's Beto's run a campaign that's been aspirational in many ways and turned out. And the question, I think, comes down to, I think the race will be close. I think it still favors Ted in this, but I think it's going to be really close, is can Beto... He's going to turn out a whole bunch of people. He's going to turn out a whole bunch of new people. Can he get enough of the white vote in Texas in order to overcome? I can see you getting to 45% of the vote as Beto, or 46% of the vote. Can you get the last 4 or 5% of the vote? And it's almost all going to be among white suburban voters.
It'll be fascinating to watch. We know you'll be keeping your close eye on Texas tomorrow night. Meanwhile, we know a group of young people in this country are watching returns come in nationwide. Those are the Parkland survivors, the March for Our Lives kids, if you will, that launched a campaign 9 months ago to enlist an army of millennial youth voters. to vote in this campaign, and by all accounts, they have succeeded. Here we see some picture from March when they had that very impressive gathering in Washington, the March for Our Lives. Let's bring in one of those co-chairs now. Ramon Contreras joins us. And Ramon, we're at 9 months into this campaign. It's all coming to fruition for you guys. Where do you think you'll have the most impact? All of your efforts. You've traversed the country this campaign. Where do you think you'll have the most impact come tomorrow night?
Well, I think we're going to see a huge impact in America in a whole, across the country. This summer, we toured the country, over 65 cities, over 20-plus states, and we have seen young people rally, we've seen young people march, we've seen young people come out to town halls, and young people have had enough. And everywhere, every state in this country, every city in this country, young people are going to go out and vote, they're going to volunteer at the polls, and they're going to show America that it's time to vote out corruption out of the halls of our Congress.
All right, Ramon, and we had a little bit of trouble hearing you, but tell us what's next for you guys. You and your colleagues have poured so much into this campaign, traversing the country. What's next for your organization and your group? What's ahead?
Well, right now we're focused on November 6th, which is tomorrow, Election Day, and we're focused on getting out the vote. We have recently been traveling to college campuses. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we hear you.
We got you.
Okay. We have been traveling to college campuses for the past 12 days, doing dorm storms, registering young people to vote in their states where they're still able to, and we've been telling people and reminding them that on November 6th they have to vote. And, you know, in terms of what's next after Election Day, you know, there's still work to do. Whether Democrats or whether Republicans keep the majority, we still have work to do. We need to urge our elected officials, new or not, to continue to do the work in Congress and continue to pass legislation that will save the lives of Americans. And that's the work that March for Our Lives and young people across the country are committed to, is making sure that we keep our elected officials accountable for the work that they promise us.
All right, Ramon Contreras with March for Our Lives, thank you so much for coming in and for your efforts to get people out to vote. Guys, I hope you all voted. I voted.
I voted.
What a year this is. Final thoughts, Matt Dowd.
I'm just going to be amazed. I'm amazed at what the turnout's going to be over. It's probably going to be over 100 million nationwide, huge turnouts in many different places. We've seen it in early vote. I'm going to watch the independents, because the independents, how they break in all these races, is going to decide.
For all of our talk about immigration, according to our latest poll, 59% of Americans do think it's a big issue, but 78% of Americans think that health care is a top issue. So it's hard TV, we don't always cover it, but still, people are really worried about the cost of health care, and that tends to break in Democrats' favor.
History is being made, guys. We just don't know what direction it's going to be. We don't know if this is a ratification or rejection, something in between. We do know that record numbers of Americans are engaging in this political process, that people are dialed in to this election season. We talk about this as a nationwide referendum on President Trump and his brand of politics, and it's all of those things. But I think bigger than that, it's giving voice to the people. This is a big moment in the country we're going to be talking about for a long time.
We sure are, and we're going to be talking about a lot tomorrow night as well. We'll have full special coverage here at ABC News Live starting at 4:30 Eastern Time, beginning with the big vote, continuing on to 2 a.m. Eastern Time. All of us will be playing news and analysis throughout the night. Of course, you can get that on your Apple TV, your Roku, your Facebook, you name it, you got it. And of course, on your traditional tube, the whole ABC News team led by George Stephanopoulos can be viewed there. For Rick, Mary Alice, Matt, I'm Devin Dwyer in New York. We'll see you next time.